Good afternoon, and welcome to the White House. My name is Tim Fullerton. I am the Director of New Media at the U.S. Department of the Interior. Before we get started, we would like to wish you a happy St. Patrick's Day, and for also taking a few minutes away from your March Madness brackets to join us in an important discussion today about youth in the America's Great Outdoors. If you would like to participate in the chat, you can go to whitehouse.gov/live and click on the Facebook link. And I'm very lucky to be joined today by both Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar, and Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, who will be answering your questions for the next 30 minutes. So for the first couple minutes, we're going to do a brief introduction or opening statement by Secretary Salazar first. Mr. Secretary?
Thank you very much, Tim. Just about a month ago, the President announced the America's Great Outdoors Initiative. It is an effort to create the 21st century conservation program for the United States of America. An absolute key component of that program is the engagement of young people in conservation across America. And to that end, we have included in the report the creation of a 21st century conservation corps for America. We want young people to be involved with us in conservation programs across the department and in your local communities and wherever you might live. For us, in the Department of Interior, we have hired this last year over 21,000 young people who are working with us all around the country. And the kinds of jobs that you can apply for and get are restoring and maintaining trails and rivers, working alongside wildlife biologists, working to understand what's happening with fish populations from Alaska to Florida and all over the 50 states of America. So we hope you're able to join us, and to find out more information about our youth conservation program, go on to www.youthgo.gov, youthgo.gov. That's an effort to try to connect up with all of you who might have an interest in becoming part of this 21st Century Conservation Corps. For sure, I know one thing, that without the young people of America being involved in the conservation agenda of our time, we will not succeed. But I'm confident that with the young people of America being engaged with us every day, that the conservation future of America will continue to be a good one and will lead the world.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Secretary Vilsack?
Thanks a lot. It's great to be with you today, and certainly look forward to the conversation and questions. But first and foremost, we clearly want to make sure that young people in the country understand the relevance of the outdoors to their life. We want to be able to make sure that our forests and our public lands are available to young people and that they take full advantage of the wonderful opportunities that the National Park Service and that the Forest Service provide. This is an opportunity for you to really help shape a conservation agenda for the 21st century. We went out, we listened to you during the Great American Outdoors hearings. Thousands of young people participated in those hearings, both in person and online. We know that you want to be able to work and volunteer in those public landed areas, and we know that you want to expand access to them. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. As is the case with Secretary Salazar, the USDA also has employment opportunities and internships where young people can have direct access to our forested areas in particular and our grasslands. But more importantly than that, I think we want to make sure that as young people are growing up in this country, they feel comfortable in the outdoors. We're concerned about the fact that a third of our youngsters are obese or at risk of being obese, and the First Lady's Let's Move initiative has suggested that physical activity is going to be very, very important in preparing young people for a very competitive future. So I look forward to your questions, and again, appreciate you taking time to be with us today.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The first question is on green jobs, and it comes from Abel from Georgia. What recommendations do you have for young people who are seeking jobs in the green economy?
Abel, the first is that you look at all of the opportunities, and you can always look either in the Department of Agriculture or look at Interior and other agencies within the government where we're standing up the 21st Century Conservation Corps program. And so go to the website, www.youthgo.gov. That's youthgo.gov, and you can get additional information on jobs that we may have available. Secondly, there are many jobs that are being opened outside of government, especially in green jobs, renewable energy all across the country. And I would encourage you to find out more about these kinds of programs. Many community colleges and other colleges now are creating a curriculum that will deal with renewable energy. We know that it will be part of our future in America. It's part of the President's agenda that we move forward with this new energy frontier. So there will be many opportunities, in my view, in the years ahead and the decades ahead for jobs in this sector.
Can't add too much to that other than to suggest that the USDA historically has about 10,000 job opportunities available during the summer for young people, which would be a companion to what Ken's department has. So there will be opportunities, even with difficult budget times. We're looking for ways in which we can put people to work. I would suggest that in addition to the green job aspect of this, that not to underemphasize the volunteer opportunities as well for young people. I know that many high schools and some colleges are now requiring service requirements in order to graduate. It's a great thing to be able to get involved in a forested area as part of a service project. So that's another opportunity for you to reconnect with the outdoors.
Great, thank you both. The next question will be coming from YouTube.
Omar Bucio, and I'm from the Los Angeles area. My question is, what programs is the government funding in order to maintain or prolong our natural resources?
Well,
I know that one. I'm sorry. I know that one was a little hard to hear for some people, so I'm just going to reiterate. The question was, what programs is the government funding in order to maintain or prolong our natural resources? Secretary Vilsack.
Well, the USDA is heavily engaged in working both on the public land side and the private land side in terms of making sure our natural resources are better preserved. We have a number of conservation programs through our Conservation Reserve Service in which we provide resources to farmers and landowners to do the right thing with their land for societal benefit, to ensure that water is cleaner, that soil doesn't erode. We obviously have all of the programs in which we are funding our U.S. Forest Service, but primarily we're working with private landowners to make sure that they do the right thing and complement what we do on our public lands.
And I would add that the President in his 2012 budget has said that conservation and investment in conservation is a very important matter, and so among many of the things that are included in there is full funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. That fund has never been funded since it was fully funded since it was created in 1964. And so it's historic that the President is saying we need to invest in conservation. So the last few days I've had the honor of traveling in Oklahoma, in Nebraska, and in Kansas City, Missouri, speaking to conservation groups around the country. And I reminded them that it's been in the most difficult times in our nation's history where investments have been made in conservation. It was Abraham Lincoln who set aside the lands that became Yosemite National Park in the midst of the Civil War. It was Teddy Roosevelt who started the conservation legacy, which is the proudest legacy in the entire world here in the United States a century ago when we were in the midst of the Industrial Revolution and rivers and lands were being created into wastelands. And it was Franklin Roosevelt who did the same thing in the Great Depression. President Obama is committed to doing that here with the America's Great Outdoors Initiative, and you'll find many components of that funding that are included in the President's 2012 budget.
You know, if I can add one other thing, it's not necessarily just in the rural areas of the country. As Ken indicated, he went to Kansas City. There's an awful lot of opportunity for conservation within urban settings as well. The American Great Outdoors report focuses on rivers and the important work that can be done in urban centers in terms of conservation and tree planting. So it's not just rural areas that can be impacted by this, but there's a significant heavy emphasis in the report on urban centers as well.
Great, thank you both. And we've been talking about the America's Great Outdoors Initiative, and if you have not seen the full report yet, you can go to our new website at americasgreatoutdoors.gov, and you can download the full report, or you can download each section of it that you'd like to see. The next question is coming from Felicia in Rockville, Maryland, and she is asking, what is one happy memory or happy time that either of you have had that was only possible because you were able to enjoy the outdoors?
Night before last, I was near Kearney, Nebraska, where in the southeastern part of the state of Nebraska, in the 10-county area, working closely with the Department of Agriculture, we've been increasing waterfowl habitat. And it was a magical moment for me that evening when for about 2 hours I was in a blind along the South Platte River. And there were literally hundreds of thousands of sandhill cranes that appeared out of seemingly nowhere. And as the sun was going down and we were seeing the crimson sky of the sunset in Nebraska, these millions of birds that have been coming to this place were settling down to roost overnight on the South Platte River. And the noise of the birds and hearing them that evening and watching the magic of the sunset and knowing that these birds have been doing the same thing now for millions of years. Was a very magical moment, but also gave to me the sense of duty that we have to make sure that these same kinds of opportunities that I get to have and that we all get to have are opportunities that we have for our children and for our grandchildren. And unless we protect the planet, unless we take the conservation measures that we outline in America's Great Outdoors, those kinds of magical moments are not going to be there for our children and for our grandchildren.
I'd take myself back 47 years as a young person. My father took me up to a small farm in just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I was born and raised. It was a farm that was owned by my uncle, and it was an opportunity for us to go hunting for the first time. He had purchased for me a .410 shotgun, and we went out into this wonderful cornfield, and before long, a rooster was kicked up, and it was the first pheasant that I shot, and how proud my dad was of that, and how proud I was that he was proud. I can still capture in my mind's eye that moment on a very bright, sunny Saturday morning. It's the kind of opportunities that we want to create for moms and dads with their children to be able to not only hunt and fish, but also to, during those periods of time when you're hunting and fishing, carry forward the values that are so important to be conveyed in a family. The values of preserving and conserving our natural resources for the next generation to make sure that they're actually in better shape than when we receive them. The values that you can't keep taking from Mother Nature, you have to give something back, and that's also true of your country. So getting involved in this effort is a way in which you can not only support conservation, but it's also a way in which you can give something back to your country.
Thank you. We're going to take our first question from Facebook now. This is from Matt, who is asking, the climate is changing and likewise older and outdated models of conservation must change as well. How do you see AGO acting as a venue to ensure that we can help our lands and wildlife become resilient to climate change?
You want to take that one, Tom, and then I'll...
Sure. We at USDA are heavily engaged in researching the impact of climate on natural resources, and in fact we just put out our new forest planning rule, which takes into consideration the need for forests to be resilient and more adaptable to climate change and to conserve precious water resources. The AGO report basically creates the impetus for a continuation of a commitment to the Forest Service, a commitment that is based on the fact that this is a national treasure. We have roughly 155 national forests in the country. These are very sacred places, and in order to have them maintained against the hazards of pests and fire hazard, they have to be well maintained. And as the climate changes, the importance of forests in terms of conserving water becomes even more important. So we're doing a lot of research, and the AGO report encourages us to continue that research so that we continue to have healthy, resilient forests.
And I would add that for me, the reality of climate change is ever present when I go to a place like Glacier National Park, which is one of the true icons of our natural heritage in America. And I know that by the year 2020, the glaciers that have been there forever and for which the national park was named will no longer be there. They will have disappeared. Or look at places like the 7 states on the Colorado River Basin, where it is projected that there will be 20% less water because of climate change and what that will mean to farmers and ranchers and cities and all the recreational users that depend on water. So it's a real issue. And so what we are attempting to do, in part through America's Great Outdoors, is to try to manage the landscapes to address the reality of climate change. And part of that is looking at the landscapes as a whole, whether it's the Colorado River Basin or whether it's the Northwoods of Maine or whether it's long pine areas in the southeastern part of the state, to look at the ecological system as a whole and then to manage so that we're adapting to the changes in climate that we know we will be seeing in the years ahead.
Great, thank you. Our next question is going to come from YouTube.
Hi, my name is Crystal Robinson. I live in San Francisco and go to Galileo High School. I am a student taking AP Environmental Science class, and my classmates and I have a couple of questions to ask.
All right, thanks so much.
Why do some of the parks have limited or no access via public transportation? Because many of us would like to visit these national parks but have limited transportation to go. And also, can you help us with our state parks that are closing down?
Crystal, I've been to your area many, many times, and in fact, Golden Gate National Recreation, the whole area there is one of the crown jewels of the national park system. I think it is a shame, frankly, that there are many people who do not access our national parks because they do not have transportation ability to get there. And so we're working at it on a park-by-park basis to have our national parks be exposed more to young people. So from San Francisco to Los Angeles and the national parks that I have visited, we've seen young people that have come through programs that we've started come and visit us. And in fact, we have a major program there in San Francisco at Gateway and Golden Gate, and we would be honored if you would call the superintendent there. We'll make sure that you and a team of young people can come out and spend some time out among that particular national park. But you are correct. One of the key obstacles that needs to be overcome is how you get people from where they live to the places where we have some of these national icons. And so part of what the America's Great Outdoors report does is it also puts a focus on urban parks for the first time. We know that about 80% of the population of the United States resides in urban areas. And so we want to make sure that there are opportunities, whether you live in San Francisco or New York or St. Louis or Miami, that there are places in your backyard or close by that you can have access to.
You know, the issue of state parks closing is obviously a very important one. As a former governor, I understand how difficult that decision is for individual governors and state legislatures. What I can tell you is that we at the USDA have a very close relationship with the state forest areas and state forestry departments. And we do provide some financial assistance and help. In fact, we have suggested in this budget of ours, which is very difficult, even in the light of reductions in many areas, that we are looking for ways in which we can increase funding to our state forested and private forested land areas so that we can ensure that they are as well maintained in an all lands approach as we are with our own U.S. force. So an effort, a small effort, but nevertheless an important effort for us in the forested area.
Thank you both. And just if you are joining us now, the entire chat will be available on whitehouse.gov later today. We also want to remind you that we are taking questions on Facebook right now. So if you are on whitehouse.gov/live, click on the Facebook link and ask your question. The next question comes from Emma from Portland, Maine, who asks, how are you going to get young people to be more connected to the land by investing in sustainable agriculture? How can kids in metropolitan areas spend time outside gardening or working in the land in some ways?
One of the first things I did as Secretary of Agriculture was to actually jackhammer up a part of the USDA grounds here in Washington, D.C., which was a parking lot, and convert it into an organic garden. That started the People's Garden effort to complement what the First Lady has done here at the White House with her White House Garden. We now have over 1,250 People's Gardens around the world, and that number continues to grow. USDA is very involved in trying to reconnect people with their food supply. One way of doing that is through an effort called Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food, providing resources to expand farmers markets, to support community-supported agriculture, to encourage our schools with the school nutrition programs to have their own school gardens. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of energy in this space, and young people are really helping to move this forward. And it's an exciting opportunity. It doesn't take a lot of money to start a garden, but the rewards are very, very significant.
Great, thank you. The next question is going to come from Facebook, and this is a question from Caleb. And he asks, I'm 22 and I want to know, what are your plans for our national parks?
Caleb, it's a good question because our parks, our national park system will celebrate its 100th year anniversary in the year 2016. And so we have been working with a commission that is helping us put together the program on what we're going to do for the second century of the national park system. And we'll be working with the Congress, obviously, and trying to move forward with legislation that will deal with that issue. But let me just make a couple of points about that. We have a tremendous national park system in this country with almost 400 units and almost 400,000 visitors that come from all over the country to see these places that we have, from the Statue of Liberty to the ruins of the southwestern Colorado, where the Anasazi at one time lived. And so all over this country we have these great national treasures that we want to share with people. But the reality is also that not that whole story has been told, and there's a lot more that we can do. And so, for example, one of the things that we are doing now is we are commemorating and establishing parks around the Japanese internment camps so that we can remember that chapter of America's history during World War II when Japanese were being interned in our own homeland. Or as I did a few weeks ago in the southern part of California, we opened up a National Historic Site in a 40-acre compound that was once the place where the farm worker leader Cesar Chavez did his two fasts in 1968 and in 1988. And so we need to do more to make sure that we're comprehensive and that we're reaching out to all of the American people and to the diverse population that we have in the United States. So we're working at it, and I think that Ken Burns and Dayton Duncan last year in the national documentary that they put together, 12-hour documentary, where they said, they titled their documentary, America's National Parks, America's Best Idea. And when I asked Ken Burns why it was that they had named it America's Best Idea, he said, it's because the national parks are uniquely American. They're radically democratic. He said if you were living in places of the nobles in Europe and you had a place like Yosemite, it would be walled off and it would only be the nobles and the noblemen and the lords that would be able to access Yosemite. Whereas here in the United States, when we set up national parks, we set them up because they are parks for the people. And so making sure that there's access to these great parks will be a keystone of our next century agenda for the national parks.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The next question is going to come from YouTube.
And we were wondering what the government is going to do to encourage schools nationwide to use their natural environment for a classroom. Thank you!
Let me start out with that, Tom. The President has a National Oceans Council, and they plan to move forward with a comprehensive plan for America's oceans. Not much attention historically has been paid to the oceans of America, and so there are different agencies that have different responsibilities, but we have not had a coherent plan on how we manage the oceans of America. And we have just what we control within the jurisdiction of the United States under my department, about 1.75 billion acres of lands out in what we call the Outer Continental Shelf. That's about 200 miles out from the coastlines of America. And so working with the Department of Commerce and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, we are moving forward with the National Oceans Policy, which President Obama has asked us to focus on and to prioritize how we take care of the oceans of this country.
You know, if I can add to it, even though it may be hard to understand, what's happening perhaps in the middle of the United States has an impact on our oceans in terms of what happens on our farmlands and in our cities. As they are draining into the Mississippi River, for example, and that Mississippi River then drains down into the Gulf of Mexico, there are obviously some serious consequences as a result of what we've been doing on our agricultural lands and in our cities. So what we're trying to do at USDA is to make sure that farmers and ranchers and city dwellers understand and appreciate the importance of being careful about how they apply pesticides and chemicals to their lawns, to their farms, how they can create buffer strips to protect the soil from getting into the rivers and streams and then taking those chemicals and pesticides down into the Gulf of Mexico and creating some serious compromises and situations with the dead zone. So there is an opportunity here for an integrated effort, which is why we're actually part of the Oceans Council that Ken just talked about.
Thank you both. The next question is also from Facebook, and it's from Christina, who asks, why do you believe that educating the youth is key to preserving our great outdoors?
Well, Christine, I think it's important for everybody to understand that their livelihood, the amount of food that they consume, the amount of water that they drink, the air that they breathe, and whether it's clean or not, is somewhat dependent on what happens in our forested areas, on our farms and ranches, and in the rural areas of this country. So it is important for us to be very attentive, and it's very important for young people to be engaged and involved in this and to understand precisely how their actions or inactions can either help or hurt the natural resources. We have an interesting debate going on in the country today about climate change. And we think it's very important for folks to understand that the climate is changing and it is going to impact the way in which we raise our food. It's going to impact the amount of water that we have available for multiple uses. It's going to make it perhaps more difficult for us to preserve our national forests. And it's going to be the young people who will inherit those challenges. And so they've got to be in a position to be able to be creative and innovative about how to solve those challenges and to perhaps educate people of my age about the importance of us paying attention to the environment now.
I would only add, Christina, that what has happened to me is alarming, and that is that fewer and fewer young people are getting into the outdoors and appreciating the outdoors for what they really are. Today, when you look at the statistics, it is said that young people are only spending about 4 minutes of their day playing outside. That's a very, very different statistic than what existed 10 or 20 years ago. So for the physical health of young people, it's important that they get outdoors. For them, understanding the importance of the environment and how it sustains life on this planet is very essential to the future viability of the human race and the viability of this planet. So the engagement of young people is perhaps the most important component to the America's Great Outdoors report.
You know, Ken, we may have to wrap this up pretty quickly so people can get off the computer and get outdoors.
That's probably a good idea.
I think it's perfect timing for you to mention that because we actually have time for one more question, and I think it's a great question to end on, and it's also from Facebook, and it's for both of you. It's how do we participate in the discussion for continuing the conversation of America's Great Outdoors?
Okay.
Just go to www.youthgo.gov or call our offices, get involved. We had 100,000 people participate with us across the country as Tom and our people had listening sessions throughout the United States. We'll continue to take that kind of input. How is it that we can do a better job? You raised questions earlier on in this chat about transportation and access of young people to some more national parks. Those are critical issues that it's important for us to hear because on many of these issues we'll be able to take action on. So stay involved with us as we move forward into the implementation phase of the America's Great Outdoors.
Let me take it to a different direction. You can help us be our eyes and ears and vocal supporters and advocates for the America's Great Outdoors by taking the report that has been published, understand it, study it, and then take it into your local communities. Educate mayors, educate city council members, educate state legislators, educate governors about the important role that state and local government also play in this effort. Work with us. This is going to be a partnership. Get yourself involved with a service organization and try to encourage it to become more involved in preserving and conserving natural resources that might be in your community. There's an unlimited series of ways in which you can be of help, and we certainly appreciate your involvement up to this point. Let's work together to make sure that the American Great Outdoors are appreciated by all people of this country.
All right, well, that is all the time we have for today. I want to thank all of you on whitehouse.gov and also on Facebook for participating, and also want to thank both Secretary Salazar and Secretary Vilsack for taking the time to join us today. If you are joining us late, the full video of this conversation will be available on whitehouse.gov. And also, if you want to continue the conversation on America's Great Outdoors, you can visit us at americasgreatoutdoors.gov. Thank you very much.